AI is challenging the assumption of the way product managers think. And we're in conversation today with Danny, who's going to help us unpack that.
AI.
AIs.
AI.
AI.
Hi, I'm Danny. I'm a product leader. I started my career off as a individual contributor, product manager, what people classically think of as product management. I think single, lean, agile team. Embedding user-centered design principles. In simple terms, building an app for external customers.
Yeah.
But what I really do and specialize in now is product leadership, product strategy, and especially the use of data and AI to solve the big systemic problems that organizations have and want to solve for. Probably the most influential person in contemporary product management is Marty Cagan. Marty Kagan has written a few books, inspired, transformed. They're thought of by a lot of product managers as a bit of a Bible. Marty leads Silicon Valley Product Group, and I went to a talk of his the other day, and he made an observation about AI that I think is true for product management, but also just product development and software development in general, which was, if you're using AI to just make what you already do easier and faster, you're kind of doing it wrong.
So if you're just using AI to enhance your current processes,
Yeah.
So do you mind just breaking down why, in your view, well, I suppose why you think that's the case and what people should be doing to look at it slightly differently?
If you contrast a couple of extremes, and probably the reality sits somewhere in the middle of these, you as a user of an LLM, you can absolutely use it to help you write backlog stories. Mm-hmm. You can absolutely use it to help you with research synthesis and transcripts. The way that AI is changing how software is built represents a much more fundamental change than that. I'm a really intensive user of Claude Code myself, and I use it daily. And the way that I use it, I think, suggests a different approach to some aspects of product management and a different approach to software. And in simple terms, I don't think we're just dealing with teams of people anymore. We're also dealing with machines. And agentic coding tools are not perfect, and they make mistakes. Mm-hmm. And there are many instances where you might not want to write production code with them. And the split between what's AI generated and human generated depends on what you're trying to do. But there's so many areas where they excel that often the pace with which code can get written, and especially prototypes and MVPs can be built, means that some of the conventions in terms of how, as a product manager, you work with and interface with a team are different. Now, the kind of established cadence is, there's discovery that leads a bit ahead of development, and you prototype and you validate ideas and you break things down into epics and stories aligning with a goal. But there's so many stories you can write for a 1-week iteration or 2-week iteration period. When the pace that software can be built is faster than the pace with which you can churn out requirements, it starts to question how you should think about requirements. And there's a term that's emerged that I didn't come up with, I wish I had, but a term that's emerged called specification-driven development. And essentially it's the idea that you spend much more time in the planning stage and the specification stage than you necessarily do in execution. And I think for a lot of people, this is counterintuitive. Most people working in tech now grew up in the agile age, and anything that sounds close to waterfall is a dirty word. And I'm not suggesting that we return to the days of these huge, rigid cycles before anything can be tested, writing, human crafted pseudocode in documents. But essentially you want requirements that are both human readable and machine readable, and adapt to the pace with which things can happen. And I think it just fundamentally changes the interaction between a product manager and a team. And Claude Code is a really good example of this. So Claude Code really likes markdown documents. Claude Code really likes to put plans together. At least that's how you should be using it if you want an effective result. I think it's really important to remember why you work in the way that you work and what problem it's there to solve. And the reason that in the past we were so tight on not doing too much, not having too many requirements, really focusing, was because the most expensive resource in the team was development and developer time. And that's just changing. If I can create a live data prototype in a week and it's not right, I can create another live data prototype in a week or in a few days and it might not be right. But the amount of work I can do in an iteration cycle is just ever increasing. So I think as product managers, software developers, AI engineers, anyone who's thinking about building technology, you just have to kind of step back and think, are we still solving the right problem?
So the whole software development lifecycle for me is getting challenged in current form.
Yeah.
I think the only thing I'll caveat, which I'd love to get your view on, is some organizations, a lot of people within here won't have that maturity in their infrastructure. So what's your recommendation for, if we look at product managers, AI engineers, all those sort of people, what's the recommendation for like that level, what they should be doing if their organization's not necessarily that mature yet, so they can start getting on that journey?
Well, I think it comes back to what problem are you trying to solve? Like solve the problem that you've got. And if there are aspects of, helping you apply existing patterns for product management and product development that AI can play a role in, and it's the problem that you've got right now, then go for it.
Yep.
I'm just saying, don't necessarily limit yourself to trying to solve a set of problems that may not exist anymore if you think differently. But when I first started working with LLMs, the focus of most of the work that we did was on building AI products.
Yep.
So using LLMs within applications and typically using the kind of flagship frontier models, that still exists, but there is an approach that's emerging about AI being a horizontal enabling layer just for how stuff is done. As a senior leader in an organization, you have to start to think how you can federate the use of AI as that enabling layer. Well, like you say, like all technology, it's not static, right? You can't just assume what you have and what's available to you.
I'll challenge you, right? If you had...
I like being challenged.
Right.
Because I might not be right.
No, because I was going to challenge to pull and cipher from that, right? Those like three top, because I'm hearing a few themes that I don't want to summarize for you. Those three, if you're even a leader, because you realmed into what leaders should be starting to look at and those elements. So today, if I'm watching this and I'm going, that's really interesting, but I don't even have an idea where to start, what are those three things? Like, what are those three tips of start experimenting with it? Because I'll get your view and then I might add one or two from my point of view.
So I'm going to say something a little bit off the wall here.
I like that.
Okay, so within a single team, a single product team, everybody, I think, understands the principles that the people who make the decisions about how things should happen should be close to the problem, close to the customer, close to the solution. Often what happens is when you move up an organization, decisions start to get made without that context. So my slightly off the wall advice for what senior leaders should do in organizations is put aside 2 hours, sit with technical people and do some of this yourself and get direct exposure to the implications of AI on how people work, how software gets built, the necessity of having it as an enabling layer. Do a bit of knowledge transfer. Really difficult to connect the boiler room and the boardroom in organizations. But one of the most effective ways I've seen of doing that is to share some of those concepts from down here with people up here and vice versa. You can't make good decisions in a single product team unless you have an understanding of strategy. But if at this level you're thinking, how much money do we need to put aside for an AI enabling layer? Well, get some direct exposure to what that might mean.
I love it. Love it. So it's kind of how do you, well, connecting the leaders, right, to that kind of, Ethan Mollick talks about the kind of lab and the crowd and the leadership within your team. So it's like bringing them all of those three together. Yeah, because I think the problem I see, right, and when you chat to leaders is they're almost struggling to, they see their teams are experimenting with loads of pilots, but they're not necessarily, they're just building on the current process. So it's not looking to enhance that flow. For me, it's kind of, that first point is actually have a look at what problem you're trying to solve, like within your teams. Like, what is that problem statement? Bring together members in your team so that you can work on, rather than just, your product managers going off in a silo, creating epics and all that sort of requirements, and then feeding them through to your dev team, and you then feed it through to your QA. Bring them all together, right, through those planning cycles.
And the one thing I would add to that is that user stories are being through a bit of a cycle of iteration. There's like, well, we have to have like watertight BDD style acceptance criteria, and it became very waterfally, and people started to talk about a backlog as a placeholder for a conversation, which I think is really valid. But you've just got to ask yourself, who's the conversation between? Because it's not just between people anymore. It's a conversation between people and their machine. And what's the best way of giving a machine clear direction and instructions? And it's not necessarily backlog tickets.
I've loved having you kind of on, and Danny and I like work together, right, on some of these problems day to day anyway. But what's your kind of 20-second, 30-second close out? There might be some people sat here going, look, this is really interesting, I'd love to go learn more. Or there might be some people who are kind of going, oh, my organization would never do this, but how do I even start on that journey? So I suppose, how can people educate themselves more about this topic? Then also, how do people start to challenge it by showing? What's your advice?
I think there's one fundamental thing that really is the foundation of the whole tech industry. The whole tech industry is not built on like, we use these frameworks, or we use these tools, or we use these approaches. The whole tech industry, and the why it's so globally dominant, is built on a really simple premise, which is start with why.
Start with the why. Well, there we go. Awesome. Well, thanks very much for listening. As always, follow the newsletter. I'll put Danny's details as well within the YouTube link and the LinkedIn newsletter, and see you next time.
Thanks, and feel free to disagree with me anyway.
Well, there will be, I'm sure, some disagreements.